Hello, Ayo Akinwolere here, and welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. Arne Slot has settled in nicely at Anfield and his side are top of the Premier League. But they are yet to beat anyone in the top half of the table. So how serious is Liverpool's challenge for the title? I'm joined by the Athletic's Ollie Kay and our Liverpool writer James Pearce as well. Gents, really good to have you with us. James, 9 wins from his opening 10 games in all competitions. It's the best ever start from a Liverpool manager. I was going to ask the question, are we surprised at how quickly he's settled in? But should we just flip it around a little bit and actually ask and say, do you know what? Is he a top manager?
Well, yeah, I think all the signs at the minute point to that. I think when Liverpool went for Arne Slot, the more I learned about him and heard about people, speaking to people that had worked with him, you could see the sense in going for him in terms of the style of play, you know, the way in which he kind of exceeded expectations at Feyenoord compared to the resources of some of their rivals. And we knew that he'd obviously turned down bigger jobs previously. But yeah, he just looks the part, doesn't he? And I think the caveat, which of course we'll come on to talk about, is, and even he has held his hands up to this, that Liverpool have been given quite a kind start in terms of the fixtures and the teams they've faced so far. But, you know, even saying that, he's exceeded all expectations. Let's not forget, if you rewind, 3 or 4 months, people were talking about, you know, are we going to see, you know, a kind of post-Ferguson style drop-off at Liverpool like we saw at Manchester United, because, you know, that's always the fear, isn't it? When you lose such an iconic figure, you think, how on earth can you possibly replace someone like Jurgen Klopp? But yeah, at the minute, the transition has been seamless.
Did you think, you know, it would take Slot time to adapt? Are you surprised by how quickly he's found his rhythm in the Premier League, with obviously the caveat that, you know, there are bigger teams still to come?
There are bigger teams still to come, but I think that you normally get this sort of slight culture shock with coaches coming from, whether it's from the Eredivisie or from Bundesliga or La Liga. Anyway, there's normally a shock in those first few games. It's not necessarily against one of the big teams. I can remember Guardiola talking about it after games at Leicester, and about watching. There was a game, Crystal Palace, no, who was it, Swansea v Stoke or something like that, where he was just alarmed by the style of football that was being played here and how it was all sort of fighting for second balls and so on. And I know the style of football has changed a lot anyway the last, since Guardiola's been here, but it feels like nothing has shocked Slot at all. Nothing has shocked his team at all. Uncomfortable first 25 minutes, half an hour at Ipswich, maybe. The odd, uncomfortable 10 minutes against Palace the other day. But generally speaking, it's been pretty plain sailing. And I would even say plain sailing compared to last season under Klopp, because last season under Klopp, they were in the title race, still in the hunt for 4 trophies until the final weeks when the wheels came off. But everything was really frantic. There weren't very many sort of really controlled, serene performances, and that's what we've seen most of the time under Slot, and it is impressive. And I say all of this again with the caveat that much bigger tests to come, particularly over the next couple of months after the international break.
Yeah, for sure. James, I think we've spoken about this in the previous podcast, and I think what's been really impressive for me is how he's managed to carry himself. He seems like his own character, but also, I guess, with all that was going on in the background at Liverpool, it makes it even more interesting how he's managed to come in and quieten the noise in a very strange way. What has really impressed you about him so far?
Yeah, I think that self-belief more than anything, in terms of, I think he's also struck a really good balance between being respectful to the previous era. He's eulogised about Klopp's achievements, and especially he keeps on saying, I was very lucky to have inherited such a talented squad of players, which I think is an important point, because it is a rare situation for a job as big as Liverpool to come up when they're not in a state of flux. Then he inherited a really talented group of players. So yeah, that of course is part of it, but he's also put his own stamp on it. You watch Liverpool now, and you can see it already looks like a Slot team in terms of the greater control they've got in games. Ollie mentioned then about the title challenge kind of wilting last season, and obviously Liverpool suffered that chasing in Europa League defeat to Atalanta, and you think about the FA Cup defeat to Manchester United, where suddenly from thinking about winning 4 trophies, they had to settle for the Carabao Cup, and they were just so open. At times it was like basketball, and then you look at Liverpool now, and the structure looks so much better. It was obviously a lot was made of the fact that he's the head coach rather than the manager, and I think you can see that really suits him. He's obsessed with coaching and improving players, and is more than happy to have other people around him to take care of those other elements that come with being a manager and things that Klopp took on his shoulders. So he's an impressive individual who, and the feedback I've had from players is they just love his training sessions, and not just him but the staff as well, because and again that kind of puts into perspective what he's done. It wasn't just the manager changing, it was the entire backroom staff. It was, you had a new sporting director coming in Richard Hughes as well. The entire football operation structure was rebuilt at Liverpool over the last 6 months. So yeah, that makes it even more remarkable that we're going into the October international break with them looking down on the rest of the Premier League.
Yeah, Ollie, this style of play he seems to have created, and I guess contrasting to the heavy metal sort of football that Jurgen Klopp played. You look at this and you see this, from my perspective anyway, as a manager who's always clearly built a style for himself, an understanding of what he wants to achieve on the field, but also this sort of possession-based style. Do you think it came at a really good time for Liverpool, where you sort of felt the back end of Jurgen Klopp's tenure at Liverpool, you sort of felt like his powers are waning, perhaps a little bit more structure was needed for this Liverpool team?
Yeah, if you look at the last 2 years of Klopp, I mean, I don't want to sound revisionist like everything was terrible under Klopp, because it wasn't. Klopp was brilliant for Liverpool, and as I said, they were in the hunt for everything going into, what was it, April last year, March, April. But I think, I mean, he spoke himself about his energy was fading a little bit, and he wasn't sure he'd be able to do it again. And I think there was always a slight sense with, not so much with the season as a whole, but often with individual performances, that Liverpool were papering over the cracks a bit last season. And I think this season it's been more about sort of, I don't know, not papering up. I'm not good enough on decorating to know what the correct terminology is, analogy. But I don't know, the bit that you do before you paint, and then I don't know, glossing over. It looks like the. It looks like the whole thing is more structured, but also more fluent, and it's hard to get. It's not, you normally get one type of football or the other with a coach, structured or fluent. But this looks structured and fluent, and more structured and more fluent than last season. So I think it's, yeah. Again, the caveats about the fixture list, because I don't think it's been a tougher start. But I would also say that their 2 best performances have been away to Manchester United and away to AC Milan, which admittedly those 2 clubs aren't performing brilliantly this season, but they are 2 really difficult games, and Liverpool had difficult games at Man United in the past when Man United has been no good. So it's I think the fact that they've risen to those occasions, and tactical challenges and I guess psychological challenges, mental challenges, suggests that there is more to this than just playing a bunch of duffers in the opening weeks. They have been tested in these first couple of months, and they've come through every test so far very well, and now the tests get harder naturally.
Yeah, James, you spoke about him making players better, and it's definitely something from some of the pieces that are on The Athletic right now that was highlighted when the hierarchy at Liverpool were looking at this coach. Ryan Gravenberch, we have to talk about. I wouldn't necessarily say a player renewed, because you did see glimpses of what he could potentially do under Jurgen Klopp, but a player that seems to be thriving in this role under Arne Slot. What tweaks has he made, do you think, structurally or tactically, that really suits this player?
Yeah, I think the system definitely does, because the balance of that midfield has changed, and because of the difference in the style of play. I mean, you go back to the summer window when, of course, Liverpool pursued Martin Zubimendi from Sociedad. They wanted that player to kind of fill that particular role, and it was very clear that the profile of, say, a number 6 that Liverpool had been looking at had changed from the Klopp era. When you think of the type that Fabinho was, who was so effective for so long before his form fell off a cliff. And he was more of a destroyer type, whilst Slot wanted a kind of a ball-playing number 6 who could operate in really tight areas. So I think that has helped Gravenberch. Obviously, the irony being, if Liverpool had got Zubimendi, we probably would have seen very little of Gravenberch so far, because I don't think he would have got in ahead of McAllister. And it is more of a kind of, a lot of the time, although it is fluent, it's kind of McAllister and Gravenberch deeper with, either Szoboszlai, or as it was on the weekend, Curtis Jones operating ahead of them. But so I think those changes that Slot has put in place have helped. But I think a lot of the credit just has to go to Gravenberch himself. I mean, he looks absolutely transformed in terms of just the confidence in himself. He did only show flashes last season. I think it was difficult for him because, you go back to, he obviously leaves Ajax for Bayern Munich and barely played for Bayern Munich. So it's very difficult when you come to a club as big as Liverpool and you've got so little kind of rhythm and match time under your belt. And then, of course, he didn't get that run of games for Liverpool. He was a bit part player. And I think it was in the Slot system, it was difficult really to see where he fitted in, because you felt, well, he was probably a bit too lightweight to play deep and not really, not really effective enough creativity wise when he was given chances further forward. But he just looks perfectly suited to this system. And as much, the other thing that strikes me about him is his stamina. And maybe that is just from having like a good pre-season and then, kicking on and playing regularly as he has done. But I mean, Gravenberch only completed 90 minutes twice for Liverpool in all competitions last season, which just showed that, even when he did have good moments, it was just never sustained over a full 90. Yet, now he's gone from there to you looking at him being, ever present in the Premier League and the Champions League so far. And not just that, he's been so effective and so influential in Liverpool's success so far this season that you almost think, well, how could Liverpool cope without him? And that is a remarkable leap to have made from, Liverpool went into this season with, a lot of gnashing of teeth amongst sections of the fan base because they hadn't bought a holding midfielder yet, and again, we know there's tougher tests to come, but it looked like things have, fate has clearly played a part there. And Gravenberch has grasped the opportunity given to him.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating because he's arguably been Liverpool's best player this season. You could say Van Dijk, I suppose, and maybe one or two others. But it's not just a guy who was previously slightly written off or slightly underestimated playing well. He's playing really well. He's one of the best performers in the Premier League so far this season. I think it's fascinating when it's the one position really that Slot was desperate to strengthen in the summer. And it's clearly because he looked at that squad and thought, well, this is where we're slightly deficient. It's a great squad, lots of great talents in different areas, but this is where we're slightly deficient. We want somebody who can sort of dictate the play and get box to box from that area alongside McAllister. And it reminds me a little of how, say, David Moyes, when he arrived at Manchester United, 2013, post-Ferguson, looked at that team and he wanted that kind of midfielder. He wanted Fabregas, he wanted Thiago, who obviously ended up at Liverpool many years later. And he didn't get him. And they panicked at the end of that first transfer window and ended up signing Fellaini, who took the whole team philosophy in a totally different direction. It meant that no real sort of new Manchester United style ever emerged. And it probably got to about, well, what was it, 9 years later, where still a Manchester United post-Ferguson playing philosophy hasn't really emerged. And Ten Hag came in, his former Ajax coach, and who did he want as his sort of cornerstone of his team? He wanted a player like Frankie de Jong, who's that type of player in a way. He's that sort of box-to-box, light touch playmaker, similar in some ways to Gravenberch, not identical, but similar. And he just wanted that certain player, the same way that Slot did with Zubimendi, and Ten Hag wasn't able to get de Jong. And what does he do? They panic. They go in a completely different direction. They sign players like Casemiro, Ugarte this summer. They've never gone after, again, that sort of type of midfield player, and they've never shaped their midfield that way. Whereas with Slot at Liverpool, from the start, he said, this is the way we want to play. If I can't get Zubimendi, that's fine. We'll do the same with Gravenberch, and it's working really well. And it's the difference, I think, with that word philosophy that we hear a lot about managers. There's my dog at it now, James. That word philosophy that we hear about with managers, Slot has shown there's a difference between wanting a certain type of player and being committed to a certain type of playing style, and it's working out really well for Liverpool and particularly for Gravenberch.
Of course, one of the things hanging over Liverpool's head right now, James, is the contract uncertainty. Their three most important players, Van Dijk, Salah, Alexander-Arnold. What have you made of the way Slot has handled the questions around, what's going on with those contract conversations, especially when they've been put to him? Because, even listening to him, it's clear that he's distinctively showing that he's about the coaching and all that other stuff is being taken care of in the background.
Yeah, he's just absolutely steadfastly refused to get involved in it. Yeah, and he had, I think it was in Friday's press conference that he was kind of laughing, saying, it doesn't matter how many times you try and ask me the same thing in different ways. I'm not going to discuss contract situations in public. So no, I mean we know that situation with that key trio. Dialogue with their representatives remains open and ongoing. There has been some progress on other contracts. As we reported last night that Jarell Kwanzaa is set to sign a new long-term contract reward for his development. And they've opened talks with Konate. Again, he well and truly fits into that bracket, Konate, of a player who'd lost his way towards the end of the Klopp era that has been transformed under Slot. So his current deal runs till 2026, and they want to get him tied down to a longer deal. But yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this about Richard Hughes. So it's these are complex negotiations, and I think obviously the noise online is, well, why are they doing these deals when they should be doing these deals? And it's like, well, it's not as simple as that. These are complex negotiations. Even the Kwanzaa one, which you would imagine would be very straightforward in terms of rewarding someone whose previous deal that he signed 18 months ago was before he'd even made a senior appearance. Now he's an established member of the first team squad, and they want to reward that. Those discussions started in June, so that gives you some indication of how long these things can take. Now, of course, the issue with Salah, Van Dijk, and Alexander-Arnold is the clock is ticking, because we're getting ever closer to that January the 1st date when if this impasse continues, they could potentially sign a pre-contract agreement with a club overseas.
Yeah, Ollie, Richard Hughes, we have to talk about it. Arrived as sporting director in the summer. I guess immediately this is a big one to address. It's a bit tough to kind of come in there, try to reshape this team, try to lock down your key players. It's a bit of a handful, this one, isn't it? Because Alexander-Arnold's probably still young enough to carry on at the club. Mo Salah, with his greatness, is probably the other side of his career. And Van Dijk is in a particularly interesting situation where he's also won a lot with Liverpool, and you wouldn't dismiss him from wanting a newer challenge. Yeah,
the sort of new challenge aspect is one that I think we can sometimes underestimate in these cases. It's with all three of them, they've been part of something extremely special over the last, let's say, 5-6 years at Liverpool, and players do sometimes think, well, do you know what? I fancy a change of scenery. But I think they're more inclined to feel that way when they're coming towards the end of their contract. And I think the mistake Liverpool have made is nothing to do with Richard Hughes or Michael Edwards or Arne Slot. It's the fact that these three contracts but Alexander-Arnold in particular, because of his age, have been allowed to run down so far with no new deals. And I think I've certainly written about it before. James has written about it before. There was this period where Liverpool had no continuity whatsoever at sporting director. There was a period where Mike Gordon was sort of away working on other projects and investments and so on, and wasn't really having much involvement day to day. And that is why Liverpool are in a situation where a player like Alexander-Arnold was already in his final year by the time Richard Hughes and Richard Hughes arrived, and Michael Edwards returned, and Arne Slot arrived as well. It's an inherited problem which is so much harder to resolve now, or even in the summer, than it would have been a year ago. If they'd started contract talks with Alexander-Arnold 12 months ago, or 18 months ago, or even 2 years ago, I'm sure there would have been very little problem. Obviously you have to increase somebody's money as they become more senior, vice captain, etc. His last new deal was signed in 2021. Inflation within the game, that's at some point, perhaps 22, 23, early 2024, that should have been addressed. The dynamic changes completely when somebody's in the final 18 months, never mind the final year. So he's now in a position where it would probably be natural if he's aware, and the market has made him and his representatives aware of what his value might be if he moves elsewhere. And Liverpool have never been the biggest payers. That's not to say they're stingy or working on a shoestring budget, but I think Liverpool have never been the ones who have said, look, you'll get more money here than anywhere else. They're in a difficult situation, and it also reaches the point with moving away from Alexander-Arnold and more back towards Salah and Van Dijk. They are 32 and 33 respectively. They will be 33 and 34 by the start of next season. You can't just do what you would have done when they were 28, 29 and say, I'll give them what they want. It's difficult. I look at Van Dijk and I think, well, has there ever been a better 33-year-old central defender? I think back to what Rio Ferdinand and John Terry were like at the same age, and they were creaking. They weren't at this level, where you're looking at him possibly being still one of the most influential players in the Premier League. It's so hard to replace him, yet it's also possible to say, well, if he ends up wanting like a 3-year deal on big money, it's not as easy as just saying, let's just sign it off. I think that becomes difficult. Same with Salah. We can all say how well he started this season, brilliantly, but he's not the player he was perhaps 3 years ago. He's a different kind of player. He's not as explosive. When he scored that brilliant goal against Bologna the other night, I was thinking, God, I haven't seen him do that for a while.
But the numbers are still decent, though. The numbers
are still so good. The cost of replacing that level of output and that level of efficiency and consistency, attitude, availability, even the commercial stuff, which I hate even having to acknowledge, but it's the cost of replacing these players will be enormous. But there is a calculation to be made in terms of, certainly in terms of the older two, in terms of how long can you continue to pay them at that top level. And would it be something like, a 2-year deal with a year option, or with money coming down in the second year or whatever? And do their egos take that, or do they just think, do you know what? I don't feel very wanted here. I might go off. And I do think it's just a really, really difficult situation for Richard Hughes and Michael Edwards to have walked back into, because it should have been done. It should have been done a year ago. They should never have been in this situation where they've got so many players, not just in the final year, but in the final 2 years. In the case of Robertson and Konate, and there's so much to do there. And it's good. The fact that there's progress with Kwanzaa and progress with Konate doesn't mean that they've been prioritised. It just means that they've probably been easier to reach a certain point in negotiations, whereas the other 3 deals are much harder, which is why they should have been addressed much earlier.
Well, joining us now from Madrid, we have the Athletics La Liga writer Dermot Corrigan. Dermot, we've just been talking about the contracts of Trent Alexander-Arnold, Mo Salah, and obviously Virgil van Dijk. Trent Alexander-Arnold is an interesting one, especially from a Madrid perspective anyway. Carvajal has now been ruled out for a fair bit of time. Any conversations around Trent Alexander-Arnold potentially going to Real Madrid, or anything in the press over there? Because he's a player that might not be a Liverpool player next year.
It's definitely, I was at the Bernabeu at the weekend on Saturday night when Carvajal got injured, and it was immediately obvious that it was a serious problem, that he was going to be out for a good while. And in the car on the way home, and listening to the radio, there were people already talking about who Liverpool might go for, and Trent Alexander-Arnold comes up as somebody who has been mentioned in the past as an international quality player. Madrid are always on the lookout for people coming towards the end of their contracts. They have a history of being smart about it, going for people like Courtois, even Bellingham, that they look for opportunities in the market. So it came up. Having said that, the immediate response from Madrid was, look, we're not going to go crazy here. We're not going to react immediately. It's a different Madrid maybe from a decade ago. They do things quite reasonably and calmly. They're not immediately scouring the market to see who they can bring in January. There's confidence, at least in the hierarchy of the club. There's confidence that the squad is deep enough to cover. It still looks quite, Ancelotti doesn't have that many defenders, and he's already without Alba's long-term injury. Nacho left in the summer. He was the guy who kind of covered all the different issues or the different positions in defence. So they're a bit low at right back, but it's more one that they we're already monitoring, and maybe are monitoring even more closely now, rather than something that they're ready to move immediately to try and snap them up.
Yeah, James, does negotiating for a player like Trent Alexander-Arnold, considering he could leave next year on a free, become really, really tricky? Ollie's spoken about perhaps certain players just want a new challenge. No one knows that in particular for Trent Alexander-Arnold, but based on what he represents for Liverpool, this should feel like a contract you imagine they really would like to tie down.
Yeah, I think there's a few different levels to it, because firstly, he's an incredibly valuable asset. How would you replace Trent Alexander-Arnold? He's got such a unique skill set and the creativity that he gives this team that that would leave a big void. And then you've also got the financial impact of losing someone who's £100 million plus asset. The damage of losing someone like that for nothing is damaging. And then also what he represents to the fan base as the local boy that used to peer through the hole in the wall at Melwood to watch Steven Gerrard and Fernando Torres train. So it's and he's the vice captain. When he was given the vice captaincy by Jurgen Klopp 18 months ago, it was succession planning. It was like, this guy is going to be the leader of the next generation in this team. So yeah, as Ollie said, it's just a pretty horrendous situation that Richard Hughes has inherited there, where that should have been sorted out long before he took over. And just going on to what you said in terms of now leaving it to this point, it becomes increasingly difficult, because inevitably you're going to be competing with offers from clubs who won't be paying a transfer fee. So, and we know that, I don't think there's too many examples, is there, in the modern era, of players, once they get down into their last 6 months of a deal, signing, a new contract, because the numbers just don't stack up. And of course, people say, well, how strong, are Real Madrid seriously interested? But I'd be absolutely baffled if Real Madrid weren't seriously interested. I think every top club in Europe would be keeping a very close eye on those developments and thinking, have we got half a chance of getting someone as talented and as valuable as Alexander-Arnold for nothing? So So yeah, that's the big worry, because I think with the other two contract situations, I could understand, going on to what Ollie said before about, because of their age and because they're the two highest earners at the club, Van Dijk and Salah, that I can understand why you would leave it to their last year just to assess where they're at, and of course and you've got to take the emotion out of it, and it can't be about what they've already done for the club. It has to be what you think they can go on to achieve in the next 2 or 3 years. But yeah, because of the state of flux that Liverpool was in for a period with, Jörg Schmadtke was only an interim sporting director last season. This was a real oversight, and it could end up being really costly for Liverpool, because this shouldn't have been something that was in Richard Hughes' in-tray.
Yeah, Dermot, just thinking about the relationship between Bellingham and Trent, and Agent Bellingham on the phone telling his boy to come over to Madrid as soon as possible. But obviously we're unsure as to whether or not this deal will happen, but commercially this could be also yet again another interesting one for Real Madrid. You've got two players, Adidas players. Real Madrid sponsored by Adidas. You can see the beauty of the campaign already if something like this does happen.
Yeah, in As's story on it this morning in the Madrid press, there was a reminder that the two guys had gone on holidays together to Los Angeles, Bellingham and Trent Alexander-Arnold in the summer, which I had either missed or forgotten about, but they hadn't missed it or forgotten about it. It was nice detail in the story. But again, that's people talking about it rather than that's what's coming from Madrid. I remember having a conversation a while ago with somebody at Madrid about Alexander-Arnold, and it was pointed out that the Madrid versus Liverpool games weren't his best games for Liverpool. There was a game during COVID, Vinicius Jr. ran riot against Liverpool in that game when Alexander-Arnold was marking him. There's the goal in the Champions League final in Paris as well, where Vinicius Jr. got ahead of him. So there would be kind of concerns about maybe Dani Carvajal he's an all-rounder, is a defensive kind of fullback, where he's a guy who gets up and down the line. It's not the Madrid of years ago where, okay, we'll stick Roberto Carlos or Marcelo at fullback, and there'll basically be another attacker for the team, or there'll be a guy who's more involved on the ball than off the ball. Especially under Ancelotti, they like defenders who can defend as well, which is not to say that Trent Alexander can't do that, but it's something that had come up in the conversations. So yeah, again, it's something that Madrid are going to be looking at. They were looking at Davis for left back as well at Bayern Munich, who's a player who's also coming to the end of his contract. That's a bit further down the line than Trent Alexander-Arnold would be. But as you said, there's a lot of it makes sense for a lot of reasons that Madrid would go from, and they are that clever about it, that when something makes sense for the commercial reasons that you talk about again, and somebody's available as a bargain on a free transfer, there'd be a lot of, you get a decent wage, maybe signing bonus as well. It wouldn't be a free as people say, but still there's a lot of reasons why it's going to be talked about a lot at Madrid over the next couple of weeks and months as the season goes on.
Yeah, Ollie, realistically, who turns down that life? Real Madrid come knocking at your door, the keys to Madrid, the keys to playing with some of the greatest young players in the world. I mean, it's an offer not many can refuse.
No, some do refuse. I mean, Steven Gerrard refused Real Madrid when he was at Liverpool, and I think on a couple of occasions, but certainly towards the end of his career when Jose Mourinho had just taken over, when I think he probably, there's part of him that might think, what if I'd taken that? Would my legacy really be any different, worse? He might regret that in some small way. Paul Pogba rejected them 2016 because Mino Raiola was telling him that the money that Manchester United were offering was even crazier. I would be pretty certain that Pogba would regret that. Given how his career has gone since. Mbappe rejected them in a similar situation in 2022. Well, a couple of times actually.
They got their man in the end, though.
They got their man in the end, though. but do you remember he in 2021, 22, he was winding his contract down. Everybody was expecting him to say to go to Madrid and PSG and everyone behind PSG seemed to throw basically the whole entire club at him and say, look, here are the keys to the castle. You do what you like. Here's all the money you want. And he stayed, and then immediately regretted it, and sort of couldn't wait to get out to Madrid when when the opportunity came. So look, not many people turned down Real Madrid. I think that is fair to say. You could look at a few people like Michael Owen who went out there and didn't really settle, but I think Trent Alexander-Arnold is a different personality, different generation. He's got his mate Bellingham out there. Real Madrid are also in a really, really good place now, which probably wasn't the case back in 2004. In some ways, it was a club in a state of flux. I think if that is on the table, and we don't know that it will be for all the reasons that Dermot mentions, I think it would be really hard to turn down. But I think it's in a, I think Alexander-Arnold is in a position that, from Liverpool's point of view, he probably shouldn't be in. He probably shouldn't be in a position where it's his decision to make. He should be still under contract.
Yeah, all right, Dermot. We'll let you go, and really appreciate your view from Madrid as well.
Cheers, guys.
Well, James, Liverpool are top of the Premier League, having won 6 of their 7 games. But it's fair to say we won't know fully, until, I guess, towards Christmas, really, as to whether or not this is truly a title winning or potential title winning team. It's fair to say that, there's still a few hurdles ahead for Arne Slot and his boys.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think the next couple of months is going to be the real kind of litmus test of just where this team is at, and to be fair to Slot, he has repeatedly made that point that yes, it's great to be where we are at the minute, but we're not stupid. Look at the league table. Look who we've played. Look who we've beaten. We haven't done it yet against any team that you would say that you wouldn't have almost expected Liverpool to have beaten, really. So, but yeah, after the October international break, you've obviously got Chelsea coming to Anfield. You've got Leipzig away in the Champions League, Arsenal away, which is going to be a big one in the Premier League, and then it doesn't really get much easier. Brighton away in the Carabao Cup, Brighton at home. We saw what a slick unit they are with the way they fought back against Tottenham on the weekend. You've got Leverkusen, Villa, Southampton, Real Madrid, and then at the start of December, Manchester City at home. So yeah, I think by the start of December, we will well and truly know whether Liverpool are going to be part of the conversation in the title race this season, or where whether they're going to be at where we probably thought they would be, which is around that 3rd, 4th place spot, and with a new manager that's still trying to get his ideas across and is working with players and a work in progress, if you like. So yeah, it's going to be intriguing to see how they deal with that, the step up in quality, and whether they can raise it accordingly.
Yeah, Ollie, what James said that was really interesting about potentially could be that team in 3rd or 4th place spot. I mean, that isn't so bad, is it? Manager's first year, still trying to figure out what the Premier League's doing and still trying to figure out how his players work. And I mean, I know they've started very well, but the Premier League and football becomes very real moving forward now with the Champions League fixtures and the league fixtures in tow. Liverpool fans can't be too disgruntled if that is where Liverpool end up at the end of the season.
No, I think the expectation would be that the hope would be that there's a title challenge. I don't think there was a title challenge last season. I don't think too many people were too critical of them not winning it, because they were up against 2 very good teams and they just sort of ran out of legs or ran out of headspace, it seemed, in sort of that March-April period. This season, I don't think anybody really expected a title challenger at all. I mean, look, clearly some people did, but I certainly didn't. I know when we did, when we Athletic Writers did our predictions at the start of the season, I think probably 95% of people predicted Man City or Arsenal to win the league, and Liverpool generally were picked, I'd say, 3rd, 4th. And it might be too early to say that that's changed, but I feel that they've looked like a team that can challenge. They've looked like a team that have got an awful lot of wind in their sails and are playing really well, and everything structurally seems to be working. But then, various things. just the Premier League fixtures that Liverpool have got next: Chelsea, Arsenal, Brighton, Villa, Southampton, Man City, Newcastle, Everton. It's a horrible run, really. B, the fact that there are all kinds of Champions League games, including Leverkusen and Real Madrid, in the middle of that, and C, you've got injuries starting to not pile up, but Alisson going off the other day at Palace. That's, they've got a very good deputy in Kelleher, but if Alisson's out for a few weeks or a month or so, it's bad news. He coped very, very well in a similar period, Kelleher, last season, but it's nobody at Liverpool would be rubbing their hands at thinking at the thought of Alisson being out for any amount of time. So it's I think their points per game will probably be lower over the next couple of months than they have in the first couple of months. But if look at those 8 games, if they were to win 4 of them or 5 of them, I mean, they'd be in a really good place. It's if they were to take points off Man City and or Arsenal, there might even be a bit of leeway to drop a couple of points elsewhere. But those tests get so much harder. It's quite. You do often have these sort of swings in terms of teams' fixture lists over the course of the season. It's pretty extreme, I think, to go from the start they've had to the games that are coming up next, domestically and in Europe.
Yeah, that's the point, really, isn't it, James? Injuries. We've seen it affect Liverpool last season, and we know Slot does like a much trimmed down squad. How much of an effect do you think that will have on whether or not this team is able to mount a title challenge? Because Alisson, for sure, is a very, very important player for this team.
Yeah, that's a worry, especially, I think, because he had the bad hamstring injury last season, and of course he'd already missed a game this season due to a minor hamstring issue, and now you could just tell, couldn't you, by the way he went down, that it's not going to be a small issue. I think Liverpool are awaiting scan results as we talk at the minute, but Slot, I think from the way he spoke after the game, he expects to be without Alisson for a number of weeks after the October international break. Of course, he's withdrawn from the Brazil squad. But it does underline why Liverpool refused to sanction the sale of Kevin Kelleher in the summer. We know that Kelleher was desperate to leave and go be a number one, and Liverpool just didn't get an offer which they felt truly reflected his value. I think they turned down, I think it was 7 million plus Matt Turner from Forest, which they felt was pretty derisory. I think, which I agree. I think Kelleher. I was amazed that another top Premier League club didn't come in and buy him for 20-25 million pounds. But it shows the value of having that quality backup, and also Vitislav Jaros, who obviously came on for his Premier League debut on the weekend, with Kelleher absent due to illness. He's a real talent as well. I think he's an example of the loan system working really well for Liverpool. He won the double in Austria with Sturm Graz last season, and just looked so much more impressive, physically, and also with the ball at his feet, and had a good pre-season under Slot. So the good news is obviously McAllister was forced off on the weekend as well, but he has flown to Miami to link up with the Argentina squad. Now, if that groin issue was anything to majorly worry about, I don't think that would have happened. So he seems pretty confident, McAllister, that isn't going to be something to worry Liverpool about after the international break. And by and large, touch wood, Liverpool have had a lot more better fortune with injuries so far this season. The Alisson one is obviously tough to take, but that there is a sense that a less intense brand of football and a less intense training regime has certainly resulted in fewer muscle injuries so far this season. And that is going to be key as well, because we all know that when that thing's unravelled last season, it wasn't just being without so many key players at a pivotal period. It's actually when those players came back from injury, they struggled to regain rhythm, because they'd been out for 6-8 weeks for some of them. So Alisson tough to take, although I think Kelleher is so good as we, that I just don't think that is the worry that it would be at most clubs if you lost your number one.
Yeah, for sure. Gents, let's leave it there. And Liverpool fans, buckle yourselves in. It's going to be a bumpy ride after the international break, that is for sure. James, Ollie, thanks for your time. And also Dermot, who joined us earlier as well. And also you can hear more from James on our Liverpool podcast, Walk On, as well. Right, we'll be back tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.